Welcome back to another episode of the Lone Star Under the Rising Sun podcast. In this episode, I'm going to dig through my audio archives of some of my old YouTube videos that I saved. It's audio only, so this podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, after this short little intro, it's going to be audio only. Uh, to those who are listening to the audio only podcast, well, there's not going to be much of a difference. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how I, as an American, was able to get my driver's license in Japan. So, just to give a little bit of a background here about getting a driver's license in Japan, if you're a foreigner, if you're from the UK or Australia, New Zealand, or any country that pretty much came from the UK, like a Commonwealth nation, other than America, you really don't have to do too much to get a driver's license in Japan. All you really have to do is have your license translated from English to Japanese, and it's a semi-short process, right? However, if you're an American, because each of our states has different driving laws, you have to jump through a lot of hoops, depending on where you're from. When I took the test, every American from any state pretty much had to retake a driving test, a written test, a driving test, an eye test, all of that stuff. I think, however, since then, some states have changed. So if you're from, I believe, Washington State or some other states like that, you don't actually have to take a driving test anymore. You can just do the same thing. You can translate your license over. However, me being from Texas, I still think you have to go through some of these hoops. Now, another caveat here to this is I live in a prefecture in Japan called Tochigi, and it's notoriously uh, infamous for how, I wouldn't say how difficult it is to get a license, just how much red tape and bureaucracy and everything that you have to go through to get it. For example, if you live in Tokyo, the average the average amount of times you have to take the driving test is, I think, one or two for Americans. In Tochigi, it's anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 or even more, depending on what country you're from. If you're American, you get a little bit of slack, and I explain how many times it took me to get mine. So that's just a little aside there before we get started. Also, because this was originally a video, I took the audio from a video. I originally recorded it on a GoPro camera mounted in my car. This was a driving video. Unfortunately, the video does not exist anymore, or else I would actually be putting this back up. But the GoPro I had, for some reason, the audio capture, it still captured my voice quite well. However, there is some sort of weird clicky noise that you'll hear. It's I wouldn't say it's too distracting. You can still hear my audio quite well, so don't worry about that. But yeah, when actually driving, there's some wind interference that the microphone picked up. It's very minor. Don't worry about it. The message is still clear, and you'll still be able to understand what I say. So also, this will be quite a short podcast, about 15 minutes or so. This is, I guess, like a mini episode, but I'll still count it as an episode of the podcast. So, with that being said, if you're interested in learning as an American or someone who still has to take a driving test in Japan on the process that I had to go through to get my license in Japan, give this a listen. It's still, I still believe it's still very helpful info, and I believe not much has changed in that regard, other than a few states, like I said. Now, if you're Canadian or from the UK or Australia or New Zealand, places like that, this probably really won't um, be of any use to you. There's a little bit of info in there that I had to go through that other people will have to go through as well. But the actual driving test and written test is not required. But then again, I don't know. Things may have changed for you guys as well. So just give it a listen if you're curious. If not, you're feel free to skip this one. But anyway, without further ado, give this a listen, and I hope it helps.
Hey everyone, Shea here, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a driving video and talk about how I went about getting my Japanese driver's license. So basically, I didn't get a new Japanese driver's license, I just converted my American driver's license to a Japanese one. And the whole process started almost 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago. The summer of 2012 is when I started. So in order to convert your Japanese driver's license or your American driver's license into a Japanese one, or any foreign driver's license for that matter, you have to get a few documents in order first. And if you do not know what to get first, you're kind of in for a little bit of a red tape headache, going back and forth between the driving center in your local prefecture. I live in Tochigi Prefecture, which only has one driving center, and it's a little bit far from where I live, but not as far as it is for other parts of the prefecture. And basically the documents I had to secure were, I believe, a translation of my license from JAF, the Japanese Auto, it's like a governmental thing, bureau for automobiles. Get that, and basically my driving history in Texas, and I had renewed my license and changed addresses a few times. So when I actually got to the driving center, I had to basically wait for a few hours just for them to tell me that they needed more information than what I had. So before I even took any sort of test to convert my driver's license, I basically had to go to the driving center 2 or 3 times. And this was only a small taste of what I was actually in for. As apparently, Tochigi Prefecture is one of the most difficult prefectures to convert your driver's license in Japan. And I don't know if it has to do with the fact that Tochigi had some of the worst drivers in Japan or not. That might be so. But I think the average times to take the test for Americans are around 7, which is actually how many times I had to take the driving test. And it's not that the driving test is difficult, it's just they are really strict, and they do not, I don't know anyone who's passed on the first try. But once I got my documents in order, I made the train ride over to Utsunomiya, and then the long bus ride to Kanama, where the driving center is. And you have to be there and fill out your paperwork. Each time you have to pay about 2,200 yen, which is about $22 roughly, just to apply. So you apply for that, and then you wait for a couple of hours until they're ready to look over your paperwork to make sure you have all of the paperwork. And you have to do this every single time that you go to the driving center. if you happen to have to take the test again. So they'll look over your documents, and if it's your first time, they'll make you take an eye test, make sure your eyes are good, and then you take a written test. The written test is probably the easiest part of converting a foreign driver's license into a Japanese one. It consists of only 10 questions, and you can have the choice of it being in English as well as Japanese, and I believe those are the only options, but they might have Chinese and Korean as well. But it's 10 simple, easy questions in English, and some of these are just basic common sense. In Japan, can you turn at a red signal for any reason? If there's a blue arrow pointing this way, or can you park on the side of the road in this certain thing? So, some of them you might have to do a little bit of studying for, but I went into the written test 2 times, only because of the long time between tests. But each time I went in, I didn't study really at all for the written test, and I passed it. They won't tell you your score, but if you get 7 out of 10 correct, they'll automatically pass you. And they won't even tell you how many you got right. They'll just say, yes, you've passed, now you can move on to the driving section. Well, the driving section, again, after you finish the written section of the test, then you have to wait until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon to take the driving section. And there's usually always about 15 to 20 people waiting to take the test, and there are people from all over the world. Every time I've been, there were many South Americans who were taking it, a guy from Mongolia, a few Chinese, and of course Europeans, Canadians, and Americans. Actually, I take that back. There are no Canadians who usually have to convert their license, and no English or Australian, because their licenses can convert without a driving test. I'm not exactly sure why Canadians don't have to take a driving test, because I believe they drive on the same side of the road as Americans do, but Americans have to take a driving test to convert their license to a Japanese one. And so, you meet some other people there. What's recommended, what you do is you can print off a map of the course, and the course is the same every time, and you can walk the course before you take the test to kind of get your bearings on what to do. And basically the test consists of, you have the driving instructor sitting next to you and another passenger in the back who's observing, and you just go through the course, and it basically just consists of the driver telling you to turn at certain places, go through what they call an S crank and a Z crank. S crank is just a small, narrow S-shaped curve, basically, that you can navigate through, and the Z crank is a bit sharper. So those I've never had really any issue with, but the one that always got me was, apparently I didn't look well enough at the stop sign, where it's hard to see other cars coming. And basically what you have to do, and what I found out you had to do, was you have to reach your neck as far forward as you possibly can, stretch your neck as far as you possibly can, and look to the right, to the left, to the right, and basically pretend like you're a hamster trying to reach some food. It's almost ridiculous what you have to do. But once I did that, once I exaggerated all of my looks, my turns, everything, they said it was fine. So, but I ended up taking the driving test about 7 times, and it would have gone quicker than it did if it weren't for the fact that I had to work, because for work my only days off are national holidays, but we get summers, winters, and spring break. So, and unless I had to go during the summer, the winter, or the spring break, I couldn't really take the test. So there were periods where I had to wait over 6 months before taking my next test, and that's why I ended up having to take the written portion of the test again. But I know for me it took 7 times, but there were people there that I had met that had already taken and failed the test, the driving test. They had failed that over 10 to 12 times, and I don't know if this was any sort of racism or prejudice against where these people were from, but a lot of people from the Middle East or Southeast Asia or South American countries, I had noticed, had to take the test more often than people of European descent, and I don't know, maybe that's just the average number of times they've taken it, or maybe it was just particular to these people. But from what I had experienced, most Americans and Europeans who had to take the driving test passed around 5 to 7 times. 5 to 7 times was the normal, and it really didn't matter how well you did. They would find a reason to fail you for the most part, and that's what was sort of ridiculous about taking the driving test, at least in Tochigi. I hear in other prefectures it's actually a little bit more simple. So I feel like once I finally got my driver's license converted, it was such an accomplishment, just to do something that I had been doing for over 10 years of my life. But it definitely beats, especially in the winter and summer times, it definitely beats having to bike everywhere. But so protects you from the elements, especially having a car. And for a lot of foreigners don't bother getting a car in Japan because they're either here for just a short amount of time, or in the case of here in Tochigi, it's just such a hassle to convert your foreign driver's license to a Japanese one that they don't think it's worth the time. But if you just have patience and keep at it, you can definitely do it. So that's basically the routine that I went through. I guess I can write a blog post about it to give you a little bit more details. But if you're interested, you can just Google what paperwork that you actually need, and it's pretty simple to find. So, but I hope you guys enjoyed this little story, this little video, and if you liked it, go ahead and click like and subscribe, and share it if you want, and I will see you guys next time. All right, thanks.